One line in today's gospel stands out for me. Where did he get all this? Where did he get this wisdom? Well, certainly from his mother and his father, but also from the way they taught him to practice his own religion, Judaism. He was so faithful to it. He put it into practice, perfect practice. And also his wisdom came from his ardent desire to do his Father's will. He had his constant dialogue with his Father, his will be done. Now that question about Jesus, where did he get all this? On this weekend of July 4th, Independence Day, we might ask the question, where did our founding fathers get all the wisdom to give birth to a new nation? An extraordinary nation. And the answer, to a great extent, is they received an awful lot of that wisdom from the Bible, and also from the history of the Judeo-Christian tradition, such as the sacred dignity of the person that runs through the Bible, runs through Christian and Jewish tradition, the sacredness of the person. And that is in the Constitution so well. And besides the sacredness of the person is found in the Bible and in Judeo-Christian tradition, is that authority, government authority, is really, has its source in the people. Thirdly, there's a limitation to government authority. The state is to be subservient to society. And a fourth genius quality that our founding fathers put into practice was to write a constitution. To write a constitution that said some things cannot be changed. They're inalienable rights. Or the majority of the people can vote one way. But that doesn't reject the Constitution. That we're all equal. If you look at the preamble of the U.S. Constitution, you'll find there kind of 5 objectives of the new nation. And if we were to judge the success of the new nation by those 5 objectives, we find out how wonderfully things turned out. Not perfectly. We're dealing with human beings that make mistakes. We're dealing with those who find themselves often with corruption and greed all around them. But one of the things, objectives of the new government, was domestic tranquility, to develop peace. And if you look at the United States over the years, you'll see that they've done quite well when it comes to developing not only domestic tranquility here, but also even around the world. Another thing mentioned in that preamble is justice, bringing about what is right. The founding fathers, unfortunately, inherited an economy to some extent based upon slavery. They were aware of that. They discussed it. They disagreed about it. But slowly, the founding fathers, one by one, in one state after another, began to change that. That long before the U.S. federal government outlawed slavery, some of the individual states began to do it early. They were struggling with this particular thing, but it was so much part of the Constitution, justice. All are created equal. And then, of course, freedom. And we've done quite well as a country when it comes to freedom. We've liberated Western Europe, Japan, South Korea. And no matter what you say, people around the world who even criticize us, they want to come here because of the freedom. There are even Islam states that look up to us and what we have accomplished. Another point, I think fourth point, is prosperity. In the United States, that represents only 5% of the world, has developed and created more than half of the wealth of the world. No other nation has accumulated as much wealth. Oh yes, there have been mistakes, there's been dishonesty, but still we are willing to help out people around the world. The fifth objective mentioned in the preamble is national defense. And of course we have the strongest military ever developed in the world, all around the world, to protect ourselves. But even we are called to put down genocide when we see it around the world. And we've done remarkable things when it comes to that. In a way, we can say how wonderful our nation is, despite its failings, of all that is accomplished. It's unqualified, really, success. Where did those founding fathers get all that? They say of Franklin, some call him a deist. Perhaps he was. But when they were meeting after the Declaration of Independence, they couldn't agree. Franklin says, we must pray. We must pray so that we can accomplish something together. The so-called deist turned to prayer. There's so many different examples of this. Now, the founding fathers believed that religion was very important. They believed that without religion, a democracy could not survive. And the reason they believed that, they didn't want to have one religion. They wanted to have many healthy religions that would develop in the people a morality that a democracy needed to be successful. And they have that freedom of religion clause that was so important for them. The expression of religion. Yes, there's a separation from church and state. It was a moderate one. They are to be independent of one another and to be moderately separate. However, what has developed long after the founding fathers was the idea of secularism, to remove religion from the public square, to remove it from government completely. And that was quite different from the moderate separation of church and state. The founding fathers really believed, and like the experience of our country testifies to it, that religion provides an anchor of justice deeper than any human law that people can make. That people out of authentic religion believes in the anchor of justice. That's why it's so important. Also, religion provides a full-blown version of human rights that are so important. And religion can provide an awakening to a moral consensus. We saw it in the very beginning, when there's a moral consensus that we should have independence, that taxation without representation is wrong. We're willing to fight for it. and they struggled with slavery. And finally, it was a moral consensus with the abolitionists that established the fact that slavery would be condemned. And then we would have the moral awakening of the civil rights movement, when Protestants and Catholics would come together in a peaceful way because of their religious beliefs to say that these rights of people should be fully exercised. Now, one of the problems of this exaggerated form of separation in state can be seen in the work of one justice of the Supreme Court, Hugo Black, who was on the court from 1937 to 1971. And he twisted the separation of church and state from a moderate one to a radical one in which religion could somehow be almost excluded from the government. He authored 3 Supreme Court decisions based upon a radical separation of church and state. The first one was in 1947, called the Everson case. And that Everson case said that it was not right for the government to provide transportation to students to go to a religious school. Imagine that. The government could provide transportation for students going to school, but if it was a religious school, that was against the Constitution, he said. The following year, he authored another one, the McCullen case, in 1948. And that it banded release time of public school students to go to religious education. And then the third Supreme Court decision that he established or wrote was the one in school prayer, the Engel case, which excluded prayer from a public school. A school that mentions God will be punished. A school that does not mention God will be rewarded. That was his interpretation of separation of church and state. Oh, by the way, Hugo Black was a member of the Ku Klux Klan. He also was anti-Catholic. However, he really did turn separation of church and state upside down. And we live with that to a great extent today. Oh, he said that the government should be indifferent to religion. It's not only indifferent, it becomes hostile to religion at times. Now, in the separation of church and state, we do not want biblical ethic or Christian perception or concept to become law. But it is okay to express the values behind the religious imagery or the religious concept and to debate those ideas and then let the politicians make the law. Religion is not to directly determine the law, but it can be a factor in how people argue about how the law will be defined and how it will be put into practice. That's the way it was with the founding fathers. There is an alternative between entanglement between church and state and the total exclusion of religion from the government. And in that particular area, we see wonderful examples of chaplaincy in government, in the armed forces. For 239 years, the government has been willing to finance chaplains in the armed forces. That is the middle ground between entanglement and total exclusion. We also have the tax exemption of religious schools. That's also the middle ground. Some people have changed the freedom of religion to freedom from religion. Hugo Black, unfortunately, was more of a disciple of the French Revolution than the American Revolution. Of course, the French Revolution came after the American Revolution. The ideas of the founding fathers were based upon something that the French Revolution condemned: God and religion. So the secularists today want to somehow curtail the practice of religion. But this moderate separation of church and state does not say that. They are independent of one another. They can criticize one another, which is very healthy, and they can assist one another. Religion can praise government when they're right, and government can question religion when it becomes not so authentic, when it goes off the rail. That's the middle ground. Somehow we find ourselves, like in the second reading today, with a thorn in our side, where the secularists do not want even people to talk about religion or God. Do we have to really succumb to that? Our nation desperately needs to return to the ideas of the founding fathers. Oh, they had their faults, but in spite of their faults, they wrote a constitution that no other nation really has written and put into practice the way we have. So we have an awful lot to celebrate on the 4th of July weekend. And we can ask God to bless our country, but also we can ask God somehow, through another moral consensus where people come together, Catholics, Protestants, mainline Protestants, evangelicals, to some basic religious reality that religion has played such a marvelous role in our country, and we need it more than ever without becoming an established religion in our country.